Today's episode is sponsored by our friends over at Chef IQ. I am firmly in the camp, to the surprise of no one, that every young man or woman needs a good watch. And there may be no better time, no more momentous time, no more appropriate time, right? Going into adulthood, then graduation, then college graduation, to make that moment happen. And I do these recommendation videos every year around this time, like most YouTubers. Admittedly, this is a little bit of a cliche concept, but we've got some new watches here and some old thoughts that I think are evergreen and need to be said again. I put together a little bit of a list of watches, approachable watches, entry-level luxury watches, with some complication, and then some more luxury watches, because as we know in the watch community, plenty of you folks out there have plenty of money and love to dote on your children. And that's, listen, that's neither here nor there. That's your prerogative. And my dad wouldn't buy me a fishing lure when I was a child. He told me to wait till my birthday. It was 7. I'll never forget that. I still hang it over him. One day at dinner pretty recently, he told me, I'm going to go get that fucking fishing hook and I'm going to put it in your mouth. I kid you not. He said that about a month ago. It was a treble hook. It was a Castmaster. I'll never forget it. The point is, I love this episode. I love doing this every year. So without any further ado, let's get in. We'll start with approachable, but even the luxury watches we'll talk about later today are awesome. And I tried to do in this whole episode, which is big ethos at Theo and Harris, value, right? I wanted the watches, regardless of their price point. And our lowest ones are way sub 1,000, and our highest ones go up to about 17.6 million. Let's be fair. But we like to talk about value here. So all of these watches represent, I think, more value than they cost. So let's get into it. The first watch I want to talk about is certainly no surprise. It's the Club by Nomos. Now, the Club is certainly not the only Nomos that is appropriate for a graduation gift. I would say just about anything from Nomos is really, really appropriate for a graduation gift, or honestly, at any point in life. Nomos is one of those brands that is certainly worn by newcomers and veterans alike. I know great collectors that pick up fun Nomos watches because they're just that. They're just really well made and they're fun. And they have this classic German, Bauhaus design, this minimalist modern design. It's great. My favorite Nomos may be the Tetra. My dad has a Zurich World Time, but the Club is the classic. The Club, 36 millimeters, generally speaking, in size. It comes in a whole wide variety of colors, and I think that they've done such a good job with their colors. They obviously do regular, the boring, plain colors, but also these little pastels and these colors that have a ton of personality, but because they're washed out, they aren't over the top, and I think they're very versatile, right? That's the problem with colors. Sometimes it can limit versatility, but not here, right? With the Club, the color choices are absolutely fantastic, and I couldn't recommend this watch more at $1,500. And frankly, I recommend Nomos watches, significantly over that price point. The great thing about the Club also is if you don't choose to do an exposed case back, you can do a solid case back and have it engraved as well. Great little Nomos touch. Again, I love the brand. We've done plenty of projects with them in the past, and I really just couldn't recommend them as a watchmaker more. The next one is Tissot's PRX, which, I think is one of the greatest things to come out of the rise in popularity of integrated sports watches, right? Like the Royal Oak and the Nautilus, they just blew up during COVID, and the Tissot PRX came out, but it came out well under $1,000, both in quartz and automatic. At the 35 millimeter size, which is surprisingly nice, you can get this watch just under $700, and at 40 millimeters, you can get it just over $700. Great color options. You can also do quartz at $400, which I absolutely, recommend considering. I think there's nothing wrong with that. If your budget is $400 or sub 5 and pushing it to 7, just is not where you want to be, then I really do recommend the quartz to consider. It's a great piece, a very professional watch, a watch that I think is becoming of a young man or woman. You can even do it in gold tone, which is kind of cool. I think it's a little bit feminine, but it's cool. Green dials, pink dials, all these different dial colors. Tissot couldn't have done a better job with the PRX, in my view. Now, the PRX and the Club are definitely very, kind of vintage, somewhat elegant. They're not like dive watches. They're not chunky sports watches. they are definitely kind of akin in design. So to go a little bit more sporty, which I think frankly is the design preference of most young men specifically. I'm a big fan of Vaer, specifically their D5 collection. I think it's not only among their coolest collections, but I think it's really one of the coolest collections in watches under $1,000. These watches come in at $650, $649, technically speaking. I have the Rincon colorway here. The colorway is insane and the details are great. Because the indexes are applied as opposed to painted, they gives the dial such depth. Even the date windows are really well executed, twisted lugs. Really couldn't recommend this watch more. Love the Tropic strap as well. Vaer's got some other great watches, and there's no question about it. The Dirty Dozen collection is obviously great, obviously rooted in, a great amount of history, and I couldn't recommend those watches more. But really, I think that the D5, specifically these crazy colorways, they're just, because they're not a throwback, because they don't harken back to, any history, they are, unique and individual, and they are, representative of what Vaer thinks that a watch should look like. Again, as opposed to sort of a reissue. And I love reissues. There's no question. Everyone from, the most affordable manufacturers to the most expensive manufacturers, they do reissues. But I just adore these colorways in the D5. So yeah, I think Vaer's a great brand. Now, expanding the budget just a little bit before we get into entry-level luxury, right? Before we really jump over that basically $2,000 price point, and we've stayed well below so far, Vintage Omega is something that I really recommend everyone take a look at and consider. Every watch enthusiast, I think, would appreciate so many of the watches that Omega made from the 50s through, historically I would have said through the 70s, but really even if you look into the 80s into the 90s, obviously this requires more research. So maybe you as a parent, maybe watching this, don't feel comfortable doing that research. I totally understand. Maybe your kids know more about watches than you do, and you're just trying to do a little bit of research here on YouTube to get them the greatest gift. Of course, there are many dealers. You can use our shop, but the truth is, there are a million shops out there, and there are a million different references, and not every shop has every reference. It's just impossible to have all that inventory, right? But I will use this as an opportunity to kind of open your eyes to that whole world of watchmaking, right? Of course, being original and being serviced or leaving room in your budget for a service, which will generally cost about $500, $500, $600. Keeping that in mind, Vintage Omega is amazing. They are serviceable. The quality is fantastic. The detailing is great. I think if you can get a Vintage Omega between $1,000 and $2,000, I think that the value they represent is often 2 to 3 times what you're paying. These are watches that have been reliable and revered for the last 100 years plus, and they will continue to be for the next 100 years. Couldn't recommend the space more. I know it's not just as easy if you're not going through a retail shop like ours. It's not as easy as just clicking a button, right? Like you could on Nomos's website or Tissot's or Vaer's. I know that's easier, but vintage is very cool. And if your child has expressed interest in vintage watches, be open to it. Even shoot me an email. Happy to shoot some ideas back and forth. Moving into this kind of entry level of luxury, right? We're going over the $2,000 price point, but starting off only just over. And this is one of my favorite watches on the market, even under $5,000, and the price comes in at $2,325. Before we tell you what this watch is, let's have a quick thank you to our sponsor of today's video at Chef IQ. Chef IQ is the world's smallest and thinnest meat thermometer that actually syncs with the Chef IQ app that allows you to cook your meat perfectly, to not screw up, to reduce your anxiety when you're attempting to cook a beautiful piece of meat, be it a roast or a porterhouse or a beautiful chicken. Chef IQ really is one of the most practical tools you can possibly have anywhere in your home, and it's right in your kitchen, which for me is the most important room. It is the most important thing that I ever do in my home. It is entertain. And when I entertain and when I spend money on food, I don't even want to risk the quality of that meal, which is why I use the Chef IQ Smart Meat Thermometer. And it features auto calibration too, which is incredibly convenient because you never actually need to manually calibrate your probe. And it works in a grill, in an air fryer, in a deep fryer, in a smoker, in a stove, in an oven, or a sous vide. It's available in a 1, 2, or 3 probe configuration. And again, it is all powered by that Chef IQ app. I couldn't possibly recommend this company more. So head on over to Chef IQ. The link, of course, is down below, and pick yours up. Never under or overcook your meat again. Make your life a heck of a lot easier. Now, moving back into the watch conversation, the watch I'm talking about is Christopher Ward's Moonglow. I love this watch. At just over 40 millimeters, it's not small, but the proportions are great, and there are many people out there with wrists large enough to carry it. It is not a big watch by any means. I can even wear it. I've worn them before, and I've enjoyed them, even though I generally prefer smaller watches. But the watch is breathtaking. What Christopher Ward has done here with the moon representation and the lume and the date couple, everything on this watch, in my view, is basically flawless. Sure, it's a little bit too big for some small wrists. No question there. But otherwise, and for most people, this watch is perfect. I actually gifted one of these watches to my cousin Michael this past year for his birthday. It's beautiful. He basically cried. He's a 65-year-old man, by the way. I don't think he's bought himself a watch in a couple of decades. He couldn't even believe how beautiful the watch was. And it's such a cool and neat way into the world of complication as well. The moon phase is one of the most interesting complications of all time, of history, and one of the most useful complications in history. Maybe not as useful today. More today, it's as a novelty and as just a visual interest, sure. But this watch, I mean, in a corporate setting, in any setting, is going to get like huge respect, right? I mean, I can imagine, my son wearing a watch like this, and I'm the watch guy, right? I would send him into any interview or any meeting wearing this watch if his wrist could carry it, because I just think that what it represents is so clean, so professional, so educated, and not boring. Right? Unlike some other pieces. There are so many watches that are great and elegant, but, maybe they send an old man vibe or a boring vibe that, the wearer doesn't necessarily want to reflect. That being said, I'm the most boring old man there is, but I digress. The next watch is a Theo and Harris classic. I'd like to think, and I do think, that we've played a bit of a role in its renaissance, which is the Rolex Datejust. And so many Rolex Datejusts, by the way, so many references out there, so many different variations I can't even possibly go through, between wide boy and tapestry and non-luminous and Dauphine and leaf and alpha hand. So many variations of the Datejust. Blue dials, silver dials, gold dials, taupe dials, purple dials. It doesn't end. My fascination with the Datejust will never end either. Prices are all over the place, of course, because you have varying condition, you have varying dial color, you have varying materials, you have varying references, so many. But if you're again, we're talking about vintage here. So we're talking about from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. And the later you go, the more expensive these watches get, even though the watches themselves don't change all that much, apart from the quick set date function, which is really the only noticeable difference. And frankly, I like the vintage ones in their small details even better because they have Paipan dials and everything. I have sold so many friends these watches. Sam's behind the camera right now. It was his first truly great watch, and I have zero regrets about putting him in that direction. It's a perfect watch. It's a perfect watch. 36 millimeters, engine turned bezel, white gold bezel. There's so many different variations. They're not cheap, around $4,000, and they do go up. You can get into Datejust category at 6 and 7 and 8 and 9, and depending on material, you can go over. There's no question. But there are amazing Datejusts. And the next question is Jubilee bracelet, Oyster bracelet, or strap? It all really just comes down to budget. If you don't want to allocate the extra $1,000 for your bracelet, for a Jubilee, it's a little bit more for an Oyster. Oysters are $1,500, bucks. Do the strap. Do a great strap. Period. I could have a Datejust. In fact, I've never even purchased a bracelet for my Datejust. I've never worn my Datejust on a bracelet, and I wear my Datejust all the time. Now, I love a Datejust on a bracelet, there's no doubt, but my Datejust has always been on a strap. I love it. And yeah, it saved me $1,000 on a bracelet, right? That being said, I don't think, it's in any way bad, right, to give your kid, if you're giving them a Rolex Datejust and they wanted one on a bracelet and you got them one on a strap, they can go buy their own bracelet as well. You know what I mean? I think it's just a special thing. Obviously, this is coming from a place of we're all very privileged to be even talking about this and it being, having the time and energy to talk about luxury purchases. But there's something very special about a young man or a young woman's first Rolex. There's something very classically I think just I was going to say classically American about it, but then I realized that there's something very global about it, very globally accomplished about it. Period. Is graduating college really an achievement that is deserving of a young man's first Rolex? I don't know about that. I don't know. I know plenty of young men that got their first Rolexes when they graduated college. That's true. I can't say that I would be giving my child a Rolex when they graduated college. I've always kind of waxed poetic and said that I would give my daughter or son their first Rolex when they did something that I thought, or they were behaving in a manner that was becoming of a very mature and impressive adult. Whether that came before their graduation or years after. I think that is a great occasion to mark. That being said, I'm no parent. What do I know? If you want to give your kid a Rolex for their graduation, God bless you. Go right ahead. The next watch will go down in price a little bit, and this is a great one. This is a Cartier tank, and it's not even a vintage. I think the best Cartier tanks in the market right now, dollar for dollar, are actually new in the store, and it's the Must versions. They're the Must large tank. These are quartz watches, and I have no problem with it. Cartier tanks, in my view, the value of them is not derived in their movement, be it mechanical or quartz. Frankly, a lot of the times that they were, mechanical, the movements right in the 80s, etc., the movements were not like finely decorated, handcrafted movements. They were ETA movements. So I look at the tank as a design. The tank is a design. It's a piece of history. It's a symbol of taste. It's this amazing piece of history that looks back into the First World War and does so in elegant fashion, right? The tank case being styled of the track prints that the Renault tank left. I love this watch. It is so understated. It's so elegant. This watch does not send the wrong message going into an interview. It is to people that don't know anything about watches, it is a boring old man's watch. So that your kid's not going to have it held against them. And to those who know about watches, it is the most affordable tank on the market. So they will get all the credit for being tasteful and none of the bad vibes for being a rich little right? Of course, it's still $3,450, so it's not cheap. Mom and dad certainly aren't poor. That being said, it is more of a humble tank. It is the humblest of tanks, technically speaking. So I think this is a great watch, a lifelong treasure. Wouldn't hesitate to buy this at all for anybody. I love the ladies' versions, and I would totally give one to a daughter or to a niece. I mean, and that's the real test, right? I mean, anyone can recommend anything, but would they actually buy it and give it and treasure it? And the answer is yes. The last watch I want to talk about here is I'm going to go with a sports watch again, the same way I did with the Vaer after going with the Tissot and the Nomos. I want to diversify here. I know that not every young man and woman shares my taste, and I know that my taste does not generally include a lot of sports watches. So to be fair, the Tag Heuer's glass box, the new Carrera, is fantastic. I've given this watch so much acclaim. I think it deserves every bit of it. I think it carries on the Carrera tradition that started way back in 1963 flawlessly. I think that Tag is an upwardly mobile brand. I think that they will continue to do incredibly well over the next 3, 5, 10 years. I think that's an amazing reality when you consider that not very long ago, we're going back not even 10 years, Tag was not in a great place in the minds of watch lovers. It was not a brand with any brand equity. They didn't get a lot of respect, and rightfully so. The Carreras were mediocre. Their Monacos were fine. Their vision for the future was the connected watch. Like, wow, that was weird. Right? I mean, when the Apple Watch was introduced and the connected watch was right around there, the world was saying that the next generation wasn't going to be wearing watches. This was the final nail in the coffin that watches would be obsolete. Kids don't wear watches. That was, boomer, insight. But what research is actually showing us is that Gen Z is buying more watches and more expensive watches than the previous generations. So the exact opposite has happened. I think that in a technological world where everything is so electronic and so disposable, the youngest generation, has actually found great value in wristwatches, great value in something that has survived and will continue to for the next 100 years. I think that I don't even know if they're consciously doing it, right? But I think they're clinging on to this idea of everlasting quality in this age of, throwaway garbage. So I think that's great. This is actually maybe the most optimistic graduation roundup we've ever done because, in the last year, so much has happened, right? With Gen Z, the purchasing patterns are incredible, right? And I'm very optimistic about the future of wristwatches, and the TAG Heuer glass box is a great example of that. It takes a modern approach, right? And a careful modern approach, a respectful modern approach, a detail-oriented modern approach to a heritage design. TAG Heuer brought the Carrera into modernity flawlessly. That is my view. Period. End. In black and in white, and in Skipper as well. They couldn't have done a better job. $6,400, not cheap, right? I think it's appropriately priced. Not a cheap watch for a kid that's graduating college. Let's, I don't know if I've ever told you guys, my dad wouldn't buy me a fishing hook. No, I'm just kidding. I told that story 10 minutes ago. I'm trying to play the world's smallest violin. Yeah, it's great. The last one I'll talk about is if you really want to go forward, if you want to just give your kid the world, I think that Zach Liu would part with his new Patek Philippe steel chiming watch that he just bought at Only Watch for $17.6 million. God bless him. God bless him. I don't care. I truly don't care. But the graduation watch subject certainly does remind me of, this whole concept, right? That, this guy, Zach, who I don't know, maybe a sweetheart, but it is what it is represents, I think, represents a lot of what the older generations think of the young generation, which is, really, frivolous spending, other people's money. Maybe Zach is is independently wealthy, person. Maybe his father's not rich. I'm not kidding. I have no idea. I truly have no idea. But either way, what I'll say is, I don't think it's necessarily representative. I think that this is probably a very unique, case, and I don't think that this Zach represents the future, meaning represents, is representative of the norm. And I don't just mean on a price level, I mean on a behavioral level. I think that, kids, young kids everywhere, maybe they're buying it for status, sure. But a lot of the kids that I know that have been buying watches, and I'm talking about a lot, have been buying their own watches with their money from work. I'm not saying they don't live in nice houses. I'm not saying their parents don't have money. I'm not saying that. Obviously, if the kids needed, that money, for food, they wouldn't be buying watches. Clearly, these are privileged children to some great degree. But they're saving. They're saving and they're buying. It's crazy, right? I mean, it's crazy to think that, it's normal now for a 19-year-old to actually care to save their hard-earned money to purchase a Cartier Panthère. It's kind of wild, right? You zoom out, go back 30 years. That certainly wasn't the case. You go back 10 years and kids weren't interested in watches, right? But 30 years, the idea of getting a watch like that didn't even occur to people till much later in life. Right, you don't get your Cartier, you don't get your Rolex when you're 19, right? And I got mine when I was 19, right? With the money that I'd saved from babysitting, right? So at the time, it seemed that I was an outlier. At the time, it seemed like, oh wow, Christian's a real watch guy. He saved up his babysitting money to go buy a watch. No, I was actually an early adopter of the watch, hobby. As it pertained to young people, but I was actually totally representative of now a very large percentage of people, right? I wasn't really unique at all. At the time I was, sure. But now, the fact that I prioritized having one great watch, totally normal. Totally normal. I think that's really, really interesting, right? Millennials or Gen Z spending all this money it is their money, whether you like it or not, whether you agree with their priorities or not. Young people prioritize watches. They're prioritizing watches more and more every day, and I don't see it slowing down. And I think that is all the more reason why you folks watching this, whether you're parents or aunts or uncles or the children themselves, I think it's great. And I think that you should encourage this hobby. It's a great hobby. It's a mature hobby. It can be a sickness. Ask anybody, right? You spend all this money and whatever, but it's a beautiful, beautiful problem to have. Right? There are far worse problems than your son truly or your daughter truly wanting one great thing that they intend on treasuring for the rest of their life. Not so bad. Have a great day, everybody, and see you on over at The Zero. Go sign up. Link is down below for more private discussions.